Hello everybody and welcome to our first webinar for the 2009 Google Summer of Code students and mentors. This webinar is on the Eclipse, using Eclipse for Joomla development, and I'm Mark Dexter, and hopefully we're going to have this under an hour, and I'll leave time for questions at the end. If something can't wait, then shoot something in the chat, and I'll try to remember to check the chat every once in a while as we're going through the presentation. Okay, so we're going to get started. First question is, why would you want to use Eclipse, or for that matter, any IDE? And for those of you, just to make sure everybody knows, an IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, and you'll have a better idea of what that is when we're done with the presentation. And really, the main reason to use an IDE is to help you be more productive. Or another way to put it, if you're like me and you're lazy, you'd like the software to do more of the work so you can do less of the work. So really that's the reason for using Eclipse or any kind of IDE. Obviously with PHP we can edit code with Notepad or any text editor and so on. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but I think the IDE gives you a lot of advantages. Okay, so I'm going to start with some scenarios, and have any of these things ever happened to you when you're working with Joomla or other PHP programs? Have you had to look up a PHP method signature or something else in the manual right in the middle of your typing? Have you ever deleted a file by mistake? Now, probably most of you haven't done something that silly, but I've actually done that from time to time. Have you needed to do a search through your project for all the occurrences of a variable or a method? Or have you needed to compare two files? One file is working and another file isn't working, and you're trying to figure out what the heck is the difference, why one works and why the other one doesn't work. Or have you ever wanted to see what was happening inside the program because something wasn't working right and you can't figure it out? Well, if you've done much development, probably some or all of these have happened to you. And what we're going to show today is how Eclipse can help with all of these scenarios. Now, what is Eclipse? Well, if you go out to the eclipse.org website, it's very confusing because Eclipse can be used for a lot of different things. For our purposes today, we're really focusing on Eclipse as an IDE. It can also be used as a platform for developing a variety of applications. But we're just going to focus on the IDE part. So for our purposes, I mean, Eclipse, their main claim to fame for Eclipse is it's the #1 IDE for Java development by a large margin. And it's open source, it's platform independent, it runs on Windows, Linux, Mac, and some others. Basically it's written in Java, so it runs on any platform that has a Java virtual machine for. Now, Eclipse is very mature as a Java development platform, but it's relatively new for PHP development. And there have been several projects for PHP. We're talking today about the official, what's called the PDT project, the PHP development tools. And it's a relatively new project. It's only been around for 2 or 3 years. And so while the general IDE features of Eclipse are very mature, the PHP features are catching up. They're a lot better than they were a couple years ago, and they're pretty good, but they're going to continue to get better over the next couple years. Okay, so the first couple things I want to talk about just as an overview of Eclipse is, the first thing is the workbench. So this whole screen here is called the workbench. It's actually laid out a little bit similar to Joomla in the sense that what we have around the edges are these are called views, like the PHP Explorer, console, tasks, problems, and so forth. These are all views, and then the part in the middle that's not part of a view is called the edit area, and this is where we open files for editing. So so we have the workbench, we have views, and then views are collected into groups called perspectives, and a perspective in Eclipse is just a collection of views organized for a particular task. So this is called the PHP perspective, and this is the perspective that you would use for normal PHP coding. And then we'll also see that there's a separate perspective called the debug, and we'll see what that looks like a little bit later. And the nice thing about perspectives is we can very quickly change the whole appearance of the workbench to make it easier to work on a particular type of task. So we've got views and we've got perspectives, and we can arrange these things any way we want. This is kind of a normal arrangement where you've got some stuff going on the left, the bottom, and the right, but we can drag these guys around the screen. We can put stuff up at the top. You can move one view or all the views and so forth. So you can really drag and drop and make this look just the way you want. So that's kind of a quick overview of the workbench. Now, the other thing that's important to understand is the way projects work in Eclipse. And on the project side, Eclipse is organized into what are called workspaces. And a workspace is basically a folder on your hard disk that contains all the projects you want to be able to work on at one time. So the limitation is you can only have one workspace open at a time in Eclipse. So you can have multiple workspaces, but you can only have one open at a time. And then a workspace can contain any number of projects. So for example, here I've got all of my PHP projects listed over here. And with PHP projects, it's very straightforward. These are just folders on the hard disk. So if I go out here to Windows Explorer, we can see here I'm just under my XAMPP htdocs, and I have a folder called Joomla Development under htdocs. And then these are all my projects, which are basically the same thing as here. So it's very straightforward. They're just files and folders. Let's look at what happens. This is the Joomla project that I have based on downloading the source code from the SVN. So this is the 1.5, and if I drill in here, I see what is a familiar list of folders and files. And we can also keep drilling in. So for example, I go into components, content, models, front page. We can get all the way down to a particular class and see that the front page is a content model front page class, and these are the class members, your fields and methods. One of the key things about an IDE like Eclipse is that the views here are linked to the editor. So for example, if I double click on a method over here, then it opens that method in the editor. And I can minimize these guys to get them out of the way. So for example, I clicked on get data, and I opened the get data method in the front page for editing. And you can also open files by dragging them or dragging a group, and there's a number of ways you can do that. Now, I showed a little bit about how you can drag and drop views around. You can also drag and drop within the edit area. For example, if you want to have two files open for editing at the same time, you can do that, or you can have them over here side by side, and you can split these up and basically do this any way you want. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how everything lays out and getting things the way you want set up. Okay. And then of course we can also maximize any of these things or minimize any of these areas to make best use of the screen real estate. But an important concept is to understand that there's a link between the views and the editors, which is very handy. So if you're looking at something in a view, you can quickly open that for editing. Okay, so now let's look at some features. Obviously, the editor is a very important feature in any IDE, or when you're working with PHP files. So let's just look at a few of cool features in the Eclipse editor. First thing is that we can hover the mouse and get the PHP doc information just by hovering the mouse somewhere. Now, the other thing we can do that is really cool is if I hold down the control key while I hover, then a couple things happen. First of all, I get in the tooltip, instead of just getting the PHP doc, I get the actual source code of the method that I'm hovering over. And also notice that this guy turns into a hyperlink. So if I click on that, I navigate to that method and open that for editing. So that's kind of cool. So I can just quickly, navigate and see, drill down or whatever and see exactly what's happening. Now I've got these nice buttons up here which will take me back to where I came from, which could be handy if you start navigating around. There's also the cool button up here which is your last edit location. So if you want to go not just to where you were browsing the code but where you actually last made a change, that can be a very handy button up there as well. And then another thing we can do which is handy is if I'm sitting here on a PHP statement, I can right click, say open PHP manual, and it'll open up the manual for the statement I was looking at. So that can be kind of handy as well. Okay, now let's look at one of my favorite features in Eclipse. Being kind of a lazy typist, I like to get the IDE to really help me with the typing, and Eclipse is pretty good at that. So for example, let's say I've got a long variable name. Like that. Now, the next time I want to use that guy, if I go $, it shows me here all of the variables that I might be trying to type. And then if I type, in this case, $L, it's the only one that starts with L, and if I just hit enter there, it gives me that variable. So that is actually a very handy feature for a lazy person like me, and also it prevents a lot of typing mistakes. So you don't have to worry about did I make a typo in the middle of that. Now similarly, we can do something like typing an object name, so like this, and then if I hit the old arrow, it shows me all of the members of the this class, which again is a content model front page. And if I type something like get, and then I'm hitting the control space here to open that window, then it shows me everything that starts with get. And if I type a T there, then it shows me those guys. So again, it can save a lot of typing. So if I hit the enter there, it says you must have wanted get table. So again, that's kind of a cool feature. Now look at what's happening here. This is a little bit subtle, but when this method is looking for 3 arguments, and if you see here, this first guy is in bold, name is in bold, and if I type $A and then hit the comma, now it knows that I'm entering in the second method. So I can easily see, okay, A is for the name, and now the second method is the prefix, and then this third method is options. So that's kind of a handy thing. It shows you, which argument you're typing in at that time. And just a subtle little thing here, it automatically put in both of the opening and closing parentheses. If I type in the right paren now, it knows I've already got the right paren there. So it doesn't give me another one. It just cursors past that. So that's kind of a cool thing for code completion. And then another thing we can do here is use what they call templates. So for example, if I wanted to put a for statement here, if I type in for and hit Control Space, I can put in just a for each or for or anything that starts with for, but I can also do 3 different kinds of templates for for statements. So if I hit this first one there, it's giving me a template for a for statement. So it's for index. So if I go I and then tab less than whatever 10 tab, it's very quickly built me a nice little for loop. And similarly, I could do like a switch, and again it gives me, I can tab back and forth between the two of the variables, and it gives me the nice structure of the switch statement. Now Eclipse is very configurable, and the templates are one good example of this. For example, if I go up here and go to Window, Preferences, PHP, Code Style, Code Templates, click on Code here and expand that. These are all the templates that we have. For example, if I look at the switch, that's the template we were just looking at, or the for statement. So you can see that we can edit these templates, or we can create new templates and make them work just the way we want to. And if we just take a minute to look at this, we can see that there are a lot of options for configuring Eclipse in terms of fonts, appearance, and so on, so that you can really make this work the way you want. Now, coming from a Java type background, you might expect that Eclipse would be very good at giving you an object-oriented type view of your project. Let's look at a couple of these. First of all, again, looking at the front page here, if I right-click and say Quick Type Hierarchy, or I could also do Control+T, I get a pop-up that shows that the current type, Content Model Front Page, is a subtype of JModel, which is a subtype of JObject. Now, if I want to see an actual view of that, I can open up the actual type hierarchy, and that shows me that over in this view, similar information. I've got my content model front page, and it's a subclass of JModel, subclass of JObject, and then down here I have my members of the content model front page. And if I click this guy, Show All Inherited Members, I can also see then not only the members of the content model front page, but then I can see all the inherited members. So I can see here's a constructor from JObject, and then here it's overridden in JModel, and so forth. So I can see all of the members and where they come from. Another cool view in Eclipse is this project outline, and this is very handy. It lets you see all of the classes in the whole project. So these are all of the classes in the Joomla framework, and you can drill down on them. Let's find an interesting one here. So here's JHTML. You can see again all the members of that class, and as I mentioned before, these are linked to the editor. So if I double click on a member there, I open that guy for editing. So again, we can look at we can see the project in a number of different ways. We can see it based on file and folders, or we can see it based on more of an object-oriented view of it. Now, another cool little feature that I've got to be able, that I wanted to show you is, let's minimize this guy and restore that guy, is tasks in Eclipse. And this is just a nice little feature. For example, if I put in a comment somewhere in the code that has the letters to do, it creates a task down here, and then if I clear that, then the task drops off the list here. I can also create tasks signed over here, but the basic idea here is I can put stuff in the code and keep a to-do list based on comments or other tags I put in the code. So again, just a handy feature. Now, one of the examples I mentioned is anybody ever deleted a file. Now, I'm sure that you guys have never done this, but I've actually done this where I deleted a file that I didn't want to delete. So I want to talk a little bit about a feature in Eclipse called local history. Now we're going to talk about the subversion and version control in a couple minutes, but this is something that Eclipse does on its own. So I'm going to open another project here, and I'm just going to quickly create a new file, new PHP file, and I'll call it mark delete. And I'm just going to type in some stuff, and I'm going to save it here, because by saving it I'm going to create several different versions of the file. Save it again. Save it again. Now I've decided I'm done with this file. I don't need it anymore. I never want to see it again. So I come over here and I say delete, and it says, you really want to delete this? And I say yes. I don't want to see it. Wait a second. Whoops. There was something important in that file. I need it. What do I do? Well, Eclipse keeps local history out there. So if I go File, right-click, Restore from Local History, I see that I've got my file marked delete, and if I highlight that, it gets even cooler, because I can see the different versions of this file. So these are the places where I saved that file, and I can restore these. So if I want to restore the latest one, I just hit that, restore it, and it's back. So that's kind of a cool feature of Eclipse. Now, another one, and this is one of my favorite features here, is the compare editor. And let's say that I'm editing the file I just deleted, and I want to see how I've changed that. I can say compare with local history, and if I say pick that one, then I get this really cool compare editor where I've got my current version over here, and I've got my historical version over here, and I can see exactly what has changed between those two versions. And I can use this compare editor in several different, I'm going to drag that up there to give us some more room. So there I compared it to local history. I can also compare any two files. I can compare two separate files. So let's say I'm looking at the possibility of consolidating some modules, which is actually something we are looking at doing. If I wanted to compare, say, the default file for the latest news module with the default file for the most read module, so I control click to highlight those two files, and then right click, compare with each other, I can see that the only difference between these two files is that this one's got class equals latest news, and this one's got class equals most read. So these two files are very, very similar. So that's kind of a cool thing. We'll see in a few minutes when we talk about the subversion, we'll see that we obviously can use it. We can use that for comparing as well. Eclipse has got very good search capability. It's got what you would expect in terms of a file search. You can do regular expressions and all the kind of usual stuff for files. But the other thing it has that's kind of cool is it's got a PHP search, which is a little bit more oriented toward searching PHP files, because we can search based on whether something is a type, a method, or a field. And we could limit things if we wanted to see all the declarations versus all the references versus all the occurrences. So it's a pretty powerful thing. For example, we wanted to see everywhere where we've got a declaration of a method called getName. We can search there. And so this is just places where a getName method is declared. And then we could also search for, let me just move this guy up here and then you could also search for places where the getName method is referenced as opposed to declared. So it's a cool search feature. You can also do a cool thing where you can see these things based on file, or more of an object-oriented view by playing with these buttons up here. And then this button is kind of cool. You can pin what they call pin the view, meaning normally if I do another search, this search will get overwritten. But if I pin it there, then this search will be saved for me. So a lot of cool features if you kind of dig around and look through stuff. One of the things we want to be able to do when we're working with Eclipse is we want to be able to run the application. Close this guy. Okay, so we want to be able to run the application from Eclipse. So for example, you can run any PHP file by right-clicking on it. So if I find the front-end index file, right-click and say Run as PHP web page, that'll run the front end of Joomla. But that's kind of an awkward procedure. So what we can do is we can create what they call run configurations. So I've got a run configuration called front-end 1.59, and I set it up and tell it which file to run and give it some options. And then that way I can just run it very quickly without having to find the file and so forth. And we can also set up which browser we want to run from by going in here and setting our browser in the preferences there. So if we want to do some testing on different browsers, that's easy to set up in Eclipse. And we'll also use these run configurations when we get to the debugger. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is subversion. Now, if you follow the instructions on the wiki, then we install subversion as part of the Eclipse package. And this project, for example, is under source code control. So if you're familiar with subversion, if I right-click, come down here to Team, you see all of the familiar commands you would expect in subversion. So we can commit, we can update, we can create or apply patches, and merge and so forth, and revert. So all of the things you would expect from subversion. And for example, let me just show you. I'm here on the front page again. If I want to say, where is it here? Team, show history. Then it's going out to the repository and pulling up the history for this front page file. And it takes a little bit. And so we can see these are all of the changes. Let me just minimize this guy. These are all of the changes that have happened since this was started in the version control. And then I can also use our handy compare feature. So if I double click on that, well, actually, if I double click, it'll open that old one. And then, so I've got the old version open, or I can right click and say compare. And I've got our familiar compare window where I can see, okay, this is exactly what changed between the current version and the previous version in the SVN, and we just added some stuff into the query there. Now, another cool feature in Subversion that I wanted to show is applying a patch. And I just did this yesterday when I was working on something. You can apply a patch in reverse. Let's see, I don't know what this one does, but we'll hope it does something interesting. Now, this patch has already been committed to the SVN, so it's giving me an error here. It won't let me apply it again. But if I say reverse patch, then all of a sudden it says it knows what to do. It'll take this patch out. And if I double click on one of these guys, it'll actually show me visually in the compare editor what the effect of this patch would be. So this is changing an XML file. So the local copy has an extra parameter in here for the XML file. So when you're working with patches, it's really handy. You can get a visual indication of what the patch is going to do or what the patch did do. Okay, the last thing I want to cover is the debugger, which may be the coolest feature in Eclipse. Now, for those of you that have used debuggers before, this should be fairly familiar. But if you haven't used a debugger before, this might seem like it was for me, kind of like magic. But let's just go through this really quickly. The basic idea of a debugger is that we can pause or suspend the program in the middle and examine what is going on inside the program. Then we can also step through the code line by line, again, seeing what is happening inside the program as we go through the code. So we can really look under the hood and see exactly what's happening. So let's just give this a try. Let's go back to the front page here, the get data. And we're going to double click over here, which will set a breakpoint. That guy's a little breakpoint there. So that's going to tell the program to pause at that point in the program. And then I'm going to come up here, instead of saying run the front end, I'm going to come up here and say debug the front end. So it knows to invoke the debugger. So I'll click that, and it starts executing, but it's going to suspend there. So I go back to Eclipse, and now I'm in it's automatically switched me over to this debug perspective. Remember, a perspective is a collection of views that are useful for a particular task. So in this case, we've got the debug perspective going, and there's a lot going on in this, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but up in the left here, we've got the stack trace. So this is how we got to this point in the program. So down here at the bottom, we started with the mainframe dispatch method, and then that called this guy, and then that called this guy, and so on. And eventually, we ended up at the place where we suspended the program, which is at the line 53 in the front page file. In the upper right, we have the variables view. And so these are all the variables that are in scope, and these variables can be quite complicated. For example, this is a content model front page, and it has a bunch of members and so on. We can hover to see the value of variables. So for example, if I hover on this, it shows me it's a content model front page. And if I had something that had simpler values, I could hover on that. The debugger is one of the cool things about a debugger is if you have a question like, is a variable in scope at a particular point in the program? It's a really easy way to answer that. Just fire it up, pause the set a breakpoint for where you're interested in, and then you can see everything that's in scope. Now we can also step through the code. I mentioned that. So these are our buttons that can control that. So for example, this is a step into. If I press the step into, it will step into that method. So that was the get, that was the function load data. So I've stepped into that now. So now I'm at the first line of there. And then the step return does the opposite. So that steps out, it goes to the next return statement. So it takes me back up a level in the program. So now I'm back. I started here at 53, so now I'm down to 56. And then I can just step over also. It just takes me to the next line. And I can also hit the resume button, which just continues either to the next breakpoint, or in this case I don't have any more breakpoints, so it continued to execute. So now I've got the display of the front page. The other thing that's cool about the debugger is that you can examine the contents of other expressions while you're in there. For example, let's come over here. I'm going to come over to the PHP perspective because that'll make life easier. Let me move these guys up here. And I'm going to find my views and open this guy and put a breakpoint on line 74 there. Okay, so now I'm going to refresh this page so it'll go back through. And again, it stopped at our breakpoint here. If I hit the resume key, now it's going to go to our next breakpoint that I just set, which is line 74 in the view HTML file. Now, one of the things we can do, as well as look at the variables that are listed up here, is we can examine the value of anything else. Now, for example, in this statement, we've got a couple things going on. So if I wanted to just see the value of this J route, I can highlight that, right click, select watch, and now that expression is evaluated up here in the expressions view. And I can actually type anything I like in there. So for example, if I want to add a watch expression, mainframe get template, for example, just to see what the value of that is. So anything that's a valid expression at this point in the program, I can type in the expressions view. So that's pretty cool. So let's go ahead. We're going to delete these expressions. When you're done debugging, what you want to do is terminate the session here. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll terminate, and that ends our browser sessions there. The last thing I wanted to mention was additional resources for more information. I think most of you are familiar with the articles on the wiki for setting up your workstation. There's actually a series of 3 articles there, and everything we've looked at today is based on is included in that setup. Now there's also pretty decent Eclipse online help. For example, if I go help contents, the PDT user guide. Remember, we're using the PDT or PHP development tools, and it's got a lot of good information in there. And then the subclips subversion documentation. Again, it's got a lot of good information in there. So there's pretty good online help available. And then there's also some pretty good information out at the Eclipse website, eclipse.org, and the PDT project is just /PDT there. Okay, so hopefully you saw something today that was useful and might help you when you're trying to use Eclipse for Joomla development. So I guess I'll open it up for questions. The question is, how complex can you use in the expression view? And basically anything that's an expression is fine. I don't think you can do actual sections of code with if then or things like that. But if you can put something in terms of an expression, basically anything that would be permissible in code as an expression should work in the expressions view. Unfortunately, you don't have the nice code complete, code assist features in the expressions view. So, but you could type something in the editor and then paste it in there, I suppose. Garthy's asking some more questions about the debugger. One of the things I mentioned was that they're still trying to catch up with some of the advanced features in the PHP version of this program. And things like being able to change the code on the fly or change values of variables on the fly. As far as I know, those are not implemented yet in the debugger. I think they're on the wish list, but you can do those kinds of things in the Eclipse Java debugger. But as far as I know, those aren't available in the PHP debugger. It still has pretty much the basic functions. Oh, okay. Andy's asking how to keep 1.6 updated in the current SVN, and that's really easy. I'm going to go back over here to Eclipse. All you do, now this is 1.5.9, but it would be the same thing in 1.6. In fact, I'm going to close this project and I'll come back over here and open my 1.6 project. All you do is say once a day or anytime you think that it has been changed. Well, first of all, in the one thing I didn't mention in Subversion is you see these little white stars outlined in black. Those tell me that right now I've got changes in my local copy that are out of sync with the repository. So I've made a change to a file here. In this case, I've added in a file that isn't in the repository. So that gives you a visual clue that there's something going on. But all you do to update is you right-click Team, Update to Head, which just means update to the latest version. And then you'll see that that's executing this command down here, which is the Subversion command, update to head force. And then it works for a minute. And in this case, I've actually got some things that haven't been updated, so it's actually going out and running the whole update, and that'll run for a couple minutes depending on how much stuff there is. And then when it's done, I'll be at the version, synchronized with the version in the repository. So that's all you do is right-click Team Update. It says it deleted one file, added two, updated 5, and now I'm at 11788. This is the end of the webinar. Thanks for watching.